What is up, guys? For this video I'm going to be showing you how to convert a Mark 1 Rabbit from using a V-belt on the accessory system like what I've got here to using a Serpentine belt, which is what all these parts are for down here. Now, I've had issues with this car destroying belts. You can see there's actually a bunch of dust up here on my frame rail from this belt. For some reason, aftermarket belts just don't fit quite right in these Volkswagen pulleys, and it slowly wears them down. Eventually they either come loose and fly off on you, or they get hot and they snap. One of the two. This thing has done it to me once. This belt that's on here has actually been on here for a little while, but you can see that I can come down here, tighten it up. See how it's got some play in it. You can very easily spin the alternator. I can come in here and tighten it up a little bit, and then next time I drive it, I can come down here and look at it. It'll be that loose again, and there'll be even more dust on the frame rail because this belt just doesn't fit quite right in these pulleys, even though it's the correct belt. It's the right part number, the right width, and everything. Also, doing this will allow me to upgrade the alternator, which we'll talk about in a second. So, on my car, I only have three pulleys on my accessory system currently: crank pulley, water pump pulley, alternator, and that's it. No power steering and no air conditioning. If you have AC and power steering and you want to keep them, you're going to have to do your own research on the side and try to figure out how to do that. There's not a lot of really good write-ups on keeping power steering and AC on this conversion, so you're going to have to do a lot of research and try to mix and match a bunch of parts, because I am also mixing and matching some parts from various different VWs to make this conversion possible. So let's get into the parts that we need to complete this conversion on my car. First thing, and probably the most important, is this alternator and air conditioning bracket off of a Mark III 2-liter ABA. I went and pulled this at the junkyard. It was like 15 bucks or something. This is definitely the most important part because these are hard to find used online, and they're very expensive when they do show up online used, and you cannot buy new AC and alternator brackets for them as far as I know. So you need to get one of these, and definitely make sure that it has a good tensioner on it, otherwise you'll end up having to buy a new one. So make sure it's got a good tensioner and a good pulley on it while you're there. That way you don't have to go and buy those again later or have them fall apart on you while you're driving, because the whole point of this conversion is to have a reliable belt system, and having a worn out pulley or a worn out tensioner kind of defeats the purpose of all this work. Other thing you're going to need is a water pump pulley for a Mark III 12-valve VR6. This pulley will bolt up to the water pump on this 1.8 liter / 1.7 liter. My car's actually got a 1.7 liter, but it's the same thing for the 1.8. This will bolt directly onto it, and it lines up perfectly with the crank pulley V-belt location off of the Mark III 2-liter ABA. So this is the crank pulley off the same car this bracket came from. And also, I grabbed this. On the Mark III, the V-belt drives the water pump and the power steering pump, and then the Serpentine belt drives the air conditioning and the alternator. I don't know why they did that and didn't just run everything off of the Serpentine belt, especially because running this VR6 water pump pulley allows you to run the Serpentine belt over the water pump, which completely eliminates the need for the V-belt. I just grabbed this just in case at some point I decided to run power steering, or I don't know. I just grabbed it because it was there and it seemed like a good idea to grab it while I could. And then you need the alternator from the Mark III as well. This alternator bolts straight up to this bracket. Everything lines up perfectly. And the only thing you have to wire up is the little trigger wire, which is right here, which you just splice into the trigger wire off of your Mark 1, and it'll all work. And this is also an upgraded alternator, because the alternators on the Mark 1s are 65 amp or something, 70 amp, something like that, and this is 90 amp because the Mark 3s have fuel injection, a couple of other things, sometimes power windows, so on and so forth, so they have a lot more charging ability because of that. So this is a nice upgrade for you. The charging systems on the Mark 1s is awful, so having that extra bit of amperage, especially at idle, is going to be really, really nice. And then you're going to need a belt. I don't know for sure that this belt works, but a friend of mine has this conversion done to his car, and this is the same size belt that he used, so hopefully it fits. If it does, this is the Master Pro part number you'll need. And the final thing is all of the hardware. So in here is every single bolt for the alternator, the bracket, and all of that stuff. So there's a few really important things you need to grab, and make sure you grab off of the Mark III when you're at the junkyard. And this is the other reason you really need to go to a junkyard to pull this, because even if you find a used bracket online for sale, it's not going to come up with this hardware that is very, very necessary to bolt this thing onto your engine. So, first thing is you're going to have 3 of these studs here, and then there is also a bolt right there. These 4 guys here go, well, you can't really see it, but they go down here onto the water pump housing. There's 4 of them there, and you're going to replace the bolts that are on the water pump housing on the 1.8/1.7 liter, depending on what year your Mark 1 is, and you're going to install these studs and this bolt, because these 3 studs are what this bracket attaches to. You need all of those, and then you're also going to want to grab and save the bolts for the crank pulley as well while you're in there, and then the bolts for the alternator, just so that you don't have to go and find your own later on, because it would be annoying, especially you got to pull the bolts off to get all this stuff torn apart. So just save everything. But these parts right here, these bolts, if you don't have these, you're going to be in for a very rough time, because you cannot install this bracket without these. Now it's just time to go in here and take off all of the old accessory parts. So first thing I'm going to do is crack all the bolts loose on the water pump pulley and the crank pulley, because the belt will help hold it still. I'll do that, and then I'll get the timing cover off, get the alternator and the alternator brackets off, and then we'll begin getting that bracket on right there. So I'm going to go and just get this ripped apart real quick, and then we will get to installing the bracket. Okay, I got the entire accessory system off. Pulleys, belt, brackets, alternators, everything is out of here. One thing I did do down here, this is the stud that the 2 timing covers go to. So when you take the alternator bracket out, you end up with a gap between this little bracket here and the block. So I just put a couple washers in there and ran the stud in, because that stud is what holds these 2 together. It holds that area down there on the bottom of that top cover, and holds the top of the plastic cover on the bottom. So went and put that in there, so that is taken care of. Like I said, just a couple washers and that is fixed. One thing I've noticed is that I have a broken bolt right here on the water pump housing, and then when I deleted the AC on this car, I must have taken a bolt out of here and just never put one back in. I'm gonna go get this bracket bolted up, show you guys where all the holes line up, and then we'll start getting the alternator and all the rest of the pulleys on. Okay, so what I have done since the last video, I showed you guys that I'd torn everything apart. I was able to get the one broken stud out, which was that one right there. It actually was able to weld a nut to it and get it pulled out of there. So I was able to run these 3 bolts, and also that 4th weird bolt on this one right here, which would go right here next to the tensioner. There is no casting on this block to put it on, which I thought there was, but I actually messaged my friend who's already done this conversion, and there isn't. So you just run the 3 bolts on the water pump, and you don't run the 4th one, which is perfectly fine. And then you also don't use the bolt that would go down here. All this thing is doing is holding up an alternator. It's not supporting the weight of an AC compressor anymore, so at least in my case, it's not going to be an issue at all. Okay, so you can see now there's plenty of room between that bolt head and the arm and the frame rail, but that's because I've gone in here and used my heavy clearancing tool, the light clearancing tool, and my carpenter's clearancing tool to kind of open this up a little bit. And then of course all the paint came off the area that I was clearancing, so I threw some, where'd it go? I threw some white spray paint on it, and you honestly, with all the brackets and stuff there, you'll never be able to tell that I did that. So the only people who will know that I had to clearance out my frame rail is the people that watch this video. But my friend's car, who has this conversion, didn't have to have any clearancing issues with anything. His just fit. It sits very, very close to the frame rail, but it doesn't touch. So I don't know if it's because he's replaced the front motor mount in his car, and my front motor mount's very worn out, so maybe the engine's sitting in a slightly different position. My car's an auto, his is a stick. I'm not sure, but just keep in mind you may have to come down here with a hammer or a clearancing tool and open this up a little bit. And it's not a whole lot, but you definitely want to open it enough so that the entire range that this arm is going to swing is going to clear this frame rail, just in case it's bouncing around or moving around. You have to be able to get a wrench on it too. So now, before I can bolt the bracket down, it is important that you put the timing covers back on, because the bracket will make it very hard to get to the one bolt on the water pump housing right there. So I'm going to get both timing covers put back on. I'm going to jack this thing up and get the wheel off of it again, because I had it off earlier to get to those and put it back on to roll it out and wash it. So I'm going to do that, get the covers back on, and we'll get that bracket on and start getting the pulleys and the alternator back on, and won't have to, hopefully soon, we won't have to worry about any more belt issues. So I'm going to get working on all that. Okay, I got the bracket on and both pulleys. Everything is lining up very nicely, and you can see why now you need the VR6 water pump pulleys. Like I said, this is a 12 valve Mark III VR6 water pump pulley. I think this would fit like a 96 to 98 Mark III GTI with a VR6, and it bolts directly up to this water pump and lines up perfectly with all the pulleys from the Mark III ABA 2-liter. So you do that, then you don't have to run a V-belt, and you can completely eliminate your V-belt. All I need to do is stick the alternator on, put my belt on, and hope that I got the right size, and then just wire up the alternator, snug up all of the bolts down here on the pulleys, because I just got them as tight as I could just by hand real quick, and then fire it up and see how well the alternator works, and just make sure that everything looks straight and isn't wobbling and stuff after doing the conversion. So yeah, just pop the alternator on, pop the belt on, check everything, fire it up, see how it goes. Alright, I finally got the belt on and everything is all bolted up and ready to go. I just have to wire up the alternator and just retorque all of the pulleys now that the belt is on, and this is what we are looking like. So you can see the belt is sitting perfect. Plenty of clearance between the timing cover and the belt, so all of that is good. Alternator's mounted up fine, bracket, all the pulleys, everything is good to go. Now this tensioner, I did have to do something that I'm not too thrilled on, but what I had to do was take the bolt that holds the pulley onto the tensioner, you see there. I actually had to grind the head all the way off of it, which is, well, I cut it off, but this right here, to make it clear the frame rail so that I could pull it up high enough to get the belt on, because you can actually see there's a little nick. Focus down there, you can see that little spot. So as you're pulling it up, it would come up and hit that, and right now there's plenty of room there now, but when I was pulling it up to actually get the belt on, it was hitting right there, so had to grind this bolt down. If the pulley ever has to be changed, I'm going to end up having to grind the bolt completely off to get the pulley off of it, which is going to be a pain in the butt. But that's the only option that I had, so that's what I ended up doing. I don't know why mine doesn't fit, because my friend's car, it fits perfectly, but my car is a 1.7 liter automatic. His is a 1.8 liter stick shift, so maybe that's why. He's also changed out one of his motor mounts. Maybe that has something to do with it. Not really sure. His car is also an 85 or an 86. Mine's an 82. So his cabriolet, because its cabriolet was built when the Mark IIs were in production. Mine was built, you know, during the Mark I phase. So not really sure why, but I was able to make it work, and I'm curious to see what the voltage is like at idle if I put a bunch of load on it too, because now that I have the 90 amp alternator on here instead of the GM 65 amp. So I'm just going to finish a couple things up, and then we will see how this whole system works. Also, I forgot to mention this, but top bolt goes in fine. Bottom bolt you cannot put in because there's not enough room between the alternator and the frame here. So what I did was just get a bolt that was all threads and was about that long, ran it through the back here so that at least there's something in the bottom, so it's not clamped on the bottom, but there is a bolt in there to keep it from moving. And then I just got the top very nice and tight. What I do want to do eventually is drill the threads out of the spacer that's in the alternator, and then run a bolt in from the other direction, and then just put a nut on the other side. That way it's actually clamped on the bottom. But this will be fine for now. I've checked it. It doesn't move or rattle or anything, and there is an actual bolt in there, so it's sitting in the right spot, and the bolt is tight. It's just that it's not clamped on the bottom ear, which will be okay. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go and just finish buttoning up a couple things, and then we will give this whole setup a try. Alright, I got everything all buttoned up. I got the pulleys all tight. I got the alternator all hooked up, so this is just a trigger wire that would have been for the stock alternator. I actually wasn't using this because I had a GM alternator. That's an alternator for a G body that I was running, and it kind of worked, but The G-bodies have a way bigger crank, so this thing wasn't spinning fast enough at idle speeds to charge everything very well. But it did kind of work. But I ended up finding this wire because I had left it in the harness. Got that done. And then because of this car having a smaller post on the stock alternator than this Mark III one has, you'll have to probably replace your wire terminals for the battery. So in this case, I just replaced the one here. So I put these two wires here into one terminal and put it on there, and then I've added, because of the charging issues, I've added in like a 4-gauge wire that runs straight from the alternator to the battery, which is what this one is, which I had to drill this one out. This one I just put these two together in a new terminal, took care of all that, so that's all wired up. It's pretty easy, just, you know, basically 2 wires, 3 if you have an extra battery wire, because the alternator or the electrical system on these cars is terrible. But that's all done. Pulleys are all tight. Looks like everything is sitting on the ribs like it's supposed to. Everything's all lined up. And yeah, we're all hooked back up. Got the battery back on. So we're going to go ahead and try starting this thing. And I need to open the garage door so I don't die. Key in. Come on, there we go. Idling like crap. There it goes. Alright, and it has way more load from the alternator on it, so I'm definitely going to have to tweak the idle. But we are on, and the alternator is charging. This gauge isn't dead accurate. It's probably like 14.2 volts. But if the alternator doesn't work, it sits under 12. So we are definitely charging. We are running again. And I have a coolant light flashing for some reason, which is kind of weird, but I'll figure that out later. But yeah, it's working. Let's go see what it looks like under there. No weird noises coming from this thing anywhere. We're looking great. Belt's not flopping around. I think we're good to go. Well, I'm just going to let this thing warm up and charge, burn all the water off from when I washed it. But that is going to be the end of this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and hope that those of you who have a Mark I or a Mark II and are looking to get rid of your V-belt and upgrade to a Serpentine belt, I hope that this whole thing will be very, very helpful to you guys, because this is a very common issue. Lots of people have a hard time getting a belt on the V-belt system to work, and it's sort of a fitment issue, but just because the aftermarket belts just don't seem to fit quite right. So, yeah, that's going to be the end of the video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all later.